Welcome to Sundays with Jane Eyre, everyone. This is episode 24, Wealth to the Heart, covering volume 3, chapter 7, or chapter 33 of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia. And joining me today are our friends, the Ghoul guides, Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Mary. How are you guys?
Hi. Hello. Good, thank you. How are you?
Great to have you, and great to have you. Like, we're here all on time too. So I wasn't the only one worried. It's daylight savings time now in America, but it's not in the UK yet. And last year we had a time difference that we did not take account of. This year I did. One of the people who watches the show, Roberta, sent me an email saying, remember, it's helping. So we're all set.
Thank you to everyone and Ed as well for reminding us. Luckily, I think because me and Lauren are so paranoid about this, we're like extra kind of aware about any clock changes or time changes, because yours always go forward and back 2 weeks before ours do.
Yeah,
it's just unnecessarily confusing.
It's unnecessary to do it anyway. So the day and age when it was important to do this is long in the past. So I wonder when it'll stop. So I'm sorry, there'll probably be a couple people from overseas who will join us an hour late today because they didn't know, but they weren't keeping an eye on that kind of thing. And good thing we record these things and we're all set so anybody can watch anything that they missed. Well, welcome to all of you erudite Brontosaurs and Airheads as well. If you're new to the show, just a note in our format, if you're watching live on Zoom, the chat is for you to talk to each other. And if you have a question for me or Mary or Lauren during the show, put it in the Q&A on chat. We'll do our best to hit those today. We're also streaming live on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, you put a comment or a question in the comments there. I will get to it after the show. And I encourage everyone to go and check out the Rosenbach's channel on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, like the Jane Eyre videos. If you leave comments on there, I will get back to you. So anything new with you guys right now? Mary, how's it going in the PhD quest? Is that going to finish before we're done here?
So I have submitted. I'm currently waiting for a Viva date. So it's basically the kind of, once you've written your PhD, you have to go through a kind of oral exam. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's aware, but there's been some strikes, quite a lot of industrial action in higher education in the UK at the moment. So
I did not know.
Yeah, so I'm still, I'm in, I guess, no rush at the moment, but it's something. Yeah.
She's in the good in between bit.
Yeah, that waiting stage still then.
Yeah. Okay. But this week, Lauren finally graduated and had an actual physical in-person graduation ceremony.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I wore my robes. They are fully red. So you could spot me from about a mile away. So almost exactly 2 years since I vivaed. So I finally got to graduate. So yeah, on Friday I was officially doffed with the mortarboard as Dr.
Alrighty. You're not wearing the robe now though? You just wear it now. Just wear it all the time. So
I mean, I did they're very expensive. I did consider buying it and just, wearing it around the house. But they are ridiculously expensive. But I did literally pick it up at about 9:15 in the morning for the 9:30 ceremony. And wore it till we had till the last moment where we had to hand them back at the end of the day. I think I went all over Sheffield in it. I was like, I'm not taking this robe off. I worked so hard and waited so long for this. I'm wearing it all day.
Good. As you should.
Mary and our friendship group bought me a stuffed Frankenstein teddy bear. which Mary dubbed Dr. Nixon Stein, who unfortunately is still at my parents' house, so I can't show him off. But it was a glorious graduation present, very fitting.
Had his own graduation cap.
Had his own little mortarboard cap.
Nice. All righty. I love that. Well, that is good news to hear, and congratulations to
Thank
you.
Finally.
As everybody's congratulating you in the chat as well. That's very nice. Before we started today, I wanted to share something from the Rosenbach. Just last week, I had the great pleasure of doing a behind the bookcase, hands-on tour in the library of the Rosenbach, and I think it was about 8 people were there, including one of our watchers, Cassandra. If you're here today, Cassandra, thanks for coming. And I brought out the Bronte materials that we have: the first edition of Jane Eyre, the second edition, the 2 Bronte books, Jane Eyre and Villette, that Lewis Carroll owned and has his name in there, and the preface to the second edition, the manuscript in Bronte's hand, and also we have a letter. We have one letter, one lonely Bronte letter that Charlotte wrote to Ellen Nussey, and I thought I would share that today. And it's got an interesting little thematic tie-in with what happened with what happened in last chapter with Rosamund's portrait. And let me share that here. And this is the letter. It's July 24, 1846. So it is before the novels are published, shortly before. I think she's still finishing up Jane Eyre at this point. I'm not sure, or if it has already been finished and sent off to the publishers. But it's Dear Ellen here, and I love, and it's the way it's set up here is this is the on the right here, you'll see page 1, and then this was folded over, this whole sheet was folded over, and then on the inside it was, it would go to page 2 and page 3, and then here's page 4 back here, next to page 1, because this was folded over. But let me zoom in a little here and show this. Dear Elle, and I love the very personal way that this begins. This little glimpse into Charlotte's life. A series of toothaches, prolonged and severe, bothering me both day and night, have kept me very stupid of late and prevented me from writing to you and prevented me from writing to you. Little glimpse into Charlotte's life issues, that she had, these kind of personal moments in life that you often find in letters, that are, if they don't reveal so much about them, they are at least reveal so much about their, about their thoughts, their emotions, or whatever. It gives those little details to the life that I really like. She says, let me read the rest of this. More than once I have sat down and opened my desk, but have not been able to get up to par. Today, after a night of fierce pain, I am better, much better, and I take advantage of the interval of ease to discharge my debt. And then on page 2, here we go. Let's enlarge that some over on this side here. She talks about how she wishes I wish I had 50 pounds to spare at present, and that you, Emily, Anne, and I were all at liberty to leave home without our absence being detrimental to anybody. How pleasant to set off en masse to the seaside and stay there a few weeks, taking in a stock of health and strength. We could all do with a recreation. Just, the desire to, get out of home and go off to the shore. I love that little piece too. And And then here we have this interesting thing going on here, which is, whoops, let me make that bigger and then bring it up. The this note here, I return miss, and notice how here it's been crossed out a little bit, and somebody has written Ringrose over it. I return Miss Ringrose's portrait. It is skillfully painted. And this is the link from last week. Now here, Charlotte has done this little portrait of a Miss Ringrose, who is, I think it's Amelia Ringrose. And she was a friend of hers, and there are letters back and forth between Charlotte and her. But there was also some kind of tension in their relationship. Like Charlotte was annoyed with her at times, and that has shown up in letters. And a little later, I bring up this Ringrose partly out here because a little bit later on the next page here, you see it's been almost obliterated here, and someone has written above it in pencil Ringrose here again. So what's happening is this has been intentional, is that whoever had these letters later, in order to protect the identity of other people being written about, they have actually taken the name out. And even on the last page of this letter, there's even a location, Hatheridge here, that has also been taken out right here. Somebody has erased it, and then somebody in pencil has written over Hatheridge over top of it. So I find that very interesting, that we're still in the age where people find, that for your personal letters to be revealed to anyone is often, not the best thing in the world. We often find out when certain writers had their, destroys their correspondence. We think, oh, what a shame, it's gone for posterity. But that's the way most people believed, was you shouldn't be reading the personal letters. I mean, the Cassandra Austen destroyed so many letters that Jane had written. It's a shame. I'd love to read them. They would reveal so much more about Jane Austen, but according to Cassandra and most people living in her time, it's none of my damn business what Jane thought about things and the things that she wrote. So we're just very fortunate to have anything left of these people. As a matter of fact, when for Charlotte, when her letters, when who wrote the biography, Elizabeth Gaskell was writing the biography, she had gotten a lot of letters from Charlotte's widower husband, Arthur Bell Nichols, and he had given them to her only to look over and learn from them, and then use whatever information she had from them. But then her and the publisher sent him a letter saying, well, you have to give us permission to publish quotations from these, or publish the whole letters. And he said, no, I didn't do that. But they kept hounding him, and he finally said, okay, I'll sign it over and I'll do it. And but he hadn't intended that to begin with when he handed them over. In this one here, again, this mentioned, back to page 2 here, I return Miss Ringrose's portrait as skillfully painted, a little flattering to be exposed to the, what is that word? Exposed to the view of the original, but it gives a stranger a sweet and attractive idea of Notre Amélie. I will not attempt a companion picture of my friend, for it is unnecessary. She underlines my friend here, and I find that really odd. And knowing that there was at times some tension between them, I wonder if this is a little, I don't know, like a quotation marks, like my friend, like something that she is telling Ellen without having to spell it out that we have issues with each other. Or she's accentuating it. She's saying she is my friend, and she is underlining. It's her way of noting italics without writing in an italic hand. But I find it very interesting that she has underlined my friend here. And all of this kind of just hit me so hard. And this actually last week would have been the perfect time to share this letter. I just wanted to do it at the Behind the Bookcase first, because of the portrait, because we went through all of that last week with Jane Eyre becoming the artist again. She gets her art materials back from the River Sisters, and she's able to create again. And it's so important for her to be this artist. And then it's actually key to revealing her identity to everybody. And we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So anything else in this letter? No, I just that it's this wonderful little glimpse into her life. This isn't a letter about her writing. I mean, there are plenty of other letters, but it's so nice that we have this at the Rosenbach to take care of, this little nugget of her life, and it's signed at the end just CB, which I really like. Where is that? Right at the bottom here. You can just see at the bottom. Yeah, yours faithfully, CB. I love her little CB here. And she's dated it down here July 23rd. Or has she? Or is that a later? No, that's her writing. She has added that then later. So, and so that's it. So thought I would share that letter with us today. It was really nice to share that last week with people and for us all to get a look at it and pass it around and look at that little piece of Charlotte's life. Another reason for anyone, if you're in the Philadelphia area, to come visit the Rosenbach and see things like that in our collections. So I mentioned the Jane Elliott as an artist, although she doesn't sign her painting or drawings or paintings that way or artwork that way, luckily. And last chapter we had all the kind of revelation. The last two chapters for last week we had the revelations about St. John and his secret crush on Rosamond and how he won't go forward with it because he's afraid to release these passions of himself. And then Jane becoming the artist again, and how important it is to her to be able to express herself in ways that are not exactly that are not always conventional. And we know this particularly from her watercolor paintings earlier. Any comments from either of you on Jane as an artist, or if you want to start piling on St. John now, you can do that too. So.
I mean, I just think that it shows how content she finally is. She's gone through a lot of really hard things. She's herself, had a lot of personal suffering and kind of tribulation, and she's gone through the kind of thorny path, and now she's at the other end. And it's not just that she's happy and safe and that kind of stuff, but she really feels comfortable and secure enough to absent-mindedly sign her artwork with her own name. She's it's almost like she's let so many of those guards down because she's safe. She feels safe and happy and comfortable. And I think that's really interesting, that it's just something she does absent-mindedly. And obviously painting is also something that she does when she's happy. So it's that kind of, once all her other needs are met, she's not out in the cold anymore, and she has food, and she also has friends, and she has a purpose. She's at a school, then she can use her free time to do things that she enjoys. So yeah, that's all I'd add. Lauren, do you want to talk about St. John?
We'll talk about them. We have time
plenty later. There's time for that. I think one of the best things about this kind of moment in the text is the distinction that it draws between female pastimes for the sake of accomplishment and as identity. And Hannah talked about this fantastically, and obviously she's so specialized in that she can illuminate it so well, so I'm not going to attempt to kind of talk about what she was talking about, because she knows her stuff, that girl. But one of the things that I think is so striking is that you know, she is a teacher, she is an artist, she's a friend. This is a moment where she is not Jane Eyre, comma, something. You know, she is Jane, be it Jane Elliott, Jane Eyre, she's Jane the teacher, Jane the artist, and all of those things become one coherent, consistent identity, which is something that often you don't get in women in novels at this kind of time. Often they're either sketched very two-dimensional, or they are just the accomplishment. You know, a lot of kind of heroines that draw just become the heroine that draws, sometimes because they're not written by women or because of the way they function within the novel or the text that they're in. But in these moments you have this kind of full realization of an identity. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, you know, hinting she acknowledges when she leaves Thornfield, and we know as the reader that she has to find herself before anything more can happen. And I just think that is such an important moment in literary history, that we have this main character who is a young woman who finds herself and her passion, and the acknowledgement that women can be artists and women can be creators, and that goes hand in hand with their feminine identity. It's not, you know, it doesn't unwoman them. It's all one consistent, coherent identity, which is really significant in the grander scheme of particularly 19th century literature.
It's important for Jane to be that free and independent being that she talks about, and her art is one of the ways that she does that. She's not just, doing this for kind of, social purposes to be the polished, young lady, as everybody treats her that way. She gets that kind of treatment from people, but she's creating original artwork. And the way she talked about the portrait in the last chapter that she had done is shows, the real, attention to detail she has for the aesthetic, something Hannah pointed out last week too, which I thought was fascinating, that Hannah Moss pointed out, was that how descriptions of St. John are very aesthetic, like how he looks. And previously, Jane had been always talking about she describes everyone. It's all based on physiognomy, and that's everything. But not with St. John, not with Rosamond. They get this kind of aesthetic portrait, that she describes as if she's describing them in artistic terms, not necessarily, to read their character. She does that too, but she also does that. And here it's in these last two chapters that she's becoming an artist again.
And she's doing these things. I mean, Jane is not a character who has to paint for money, for example, but a lot of the times what you get with like female, I mean, this is in real life and in novel representations. We had a seminar last week actually for this week, Gothic Women, about the Minerva Press, that, this whole thing of women's artistry was often valued as less because they didn't get to be the struggling artist or the struggling genius. They were seen as inferior because they had to create for money. And that somehow harmed the aesthetic, quality, the literary merit of their work, that, somehow that meant, oh, well, they're not real artists, they're not real writers, because they're just doing it for money, because it's one of the only ways that women can make a living. And Jane manages to get this really unique identity where she is a working woman who has an independent salary, but she is also an artist. And that's like such a unique identity. And I think the fact that she starts to be able to see people in aesthetic terms and think as an artist, and the fact that she writes her own name instead of, the name that she's given them, it all kind of is pointing towards the fact that she's whole, but also, that money and stability, these are all things that women need independently to be themselves. She's not relying on a master, be it at the school, be it at Lowood, be it at Thornfield, that she actually kind of has this this independence, and that means she can flourish. And that is like a huge kind of departure from what we've had in kind of culture up until this point, to have the artists be better because they're stable and they've got money, and that she's able to live this life as who she is. Because a lot of the time you don't get that with women artists. It's either the poor orphan who paints copies because she has to, and no one appreciates the brilliance, and then she seems to kind of put it to the side when she gets married. This is Jane, this is who she is, she'll happily be this person forever. And it's kind of like the first time we get this like career woman almost as like or the kind of a career woman as a positive character archetype, rather than a sort of like, oh, we're not sure about this.
And then Charlotte's sister Anne really brings us forward a lot in Tenant of Wildflower Hall.
Exactly. And Agnes Grey as well. Yeah.
The artist making her way in the world. Well, there's a lot of other issues going along with the reason why she's painting, but she is a professional paid artist. That is how she makes her living, and she does very well at it, and is very serious about it. All right, well, let's the end of the chapter last week was Jane notices that St. John, I saw him dexterously tear a narrow slit from the margin, which is like, really? You're like tearing a piece off the painting and or the drawing. And Jane just says, well, I exclaimed, using an expression of the district. I like this. That caps the globe. However, let's see if we can get that phrase going again. That caps the globe. She looks at the paper. She sees she can't figure out though what he's taken off of it, and I dismissed and soon forgot it. Well, it's going to reveal something big about you, Jane, that you didn't realize. And I love, Mary, how you put it. Like, she's not even thinking of it. Like, she's so comfortable, she doesn't even realize that she has put her name on it. It has just been a natural thing that she would do, and she's in a place where she's not worried about concealing that anymore. Although she was always up front that, like, my name's not Jolly. She wasn't trying to trick them. Like, she told them up front, my name's not Jane Elliott, but I'm not telling you my real name.
She has no reason to suspect that there will be any connection back to the Eyres or the Rochesters or any of that. And as we will discover in this chapter, she is wrong in that assumption. But she feels safe in that, I've told you this isn't my real name, but also, it doesn't matter, and I'm going to work for you, and then I'm going to, become a part of your community, and that's fine, and I'm going to feel safe, and we're all going to benefit from this. And she's just, there's no reason for her to think, because it's so distanced from her mind and her previous lives, I guess.
Well, she doesn't notice, and now we have the next chapter, volume 3, chapter 7, or chapter 33, and there's a snowstorm. We had snow. We had snow here yesterday. It was so bad. That's why I'm home today. Is because it's not laying anywhere, but well, except the grass and things like that. But the driveway was still icy. I decided to stay home early this morning. It was actually -1 real feel last night. I was like, oh, I love it. So, well, I love it because I can stay inside.
So you would be Jane Eyre in this situation, staying at home, not St. John Rivers, going outside, battling the snowstorms.
Well, to visit my friend, I would do it. I would chug waist deep through the snow to visit Jane in the schoolhouse.
To be fair, Mary, I have got like trapped in Sheffield or out of Sheffield trying to drive to see you before because it snowed. and
because it flooded.
Yeah. Sheffield has a lot of weather.
Yeah. Well, he battles the whirling storm, and well, actually, he leaves. After he leaves, it begins to snow, and then there's a storm all night. And Jane takes down her copy of Marmion, which he has given her. I love this, and I love that there's more Scott in here. Another Scott digression. First and last in the last chapter, when he gives her the book, Jane has this kind of rant rhapsody about poetry and how people don't appreciate great poetry as much anymore, and it's not that long since when, even when, Bronte's writing this in 47, people are still reading Scott's poetry. Even though Scott himself, before he died, had abandoned it and was writing, just novels then. But Marmion, for everyone, I mentioned this last week too, it's a tale, Marmion, A Tale of Flodden Field. It concludes with the whole Battle of Flodden. The Brits defeat the Scots, and one of the many times that it happened in 1513. And actually, it was when the Scottish King James the Fourth, I'm pretty sure the fourth, was killed in battle, and he's like the last king to die in a battle in England. So the Scots king dies, and the poem is interesting because, like all of Scott's early narrative poems, it has a lot of Gothic trappings to it, and it's a romance, so I think that there are those connections that Charlotte Bronte has in mind and throwing it in here. But I'm also fascinated too that in Tenant of Wildfield Hall, Gilbert Markham gives a copy of Marmion to Mrs. Grant, and it's like a big deal. And so this is like a Bronte in thing, I guess, is putting Marmion in their novels. Question from Marianne that I didn't answer last week is, she said, so what did Marmion tell us about when the novel is actually set? And because Jane says that it's brand new, Marmion is first published in 1808, but this novel doesn't seem to be set in 1808. That date doesn't work with the other things referred to throughout the novel. The novel seems to be the 1820s or 30s, but we do know, I think I came across one of my notes that Scott's works were republished in new editions in 1830. So she kind of could be referring to that. But for me, it's also, I don't think Charlotte Bronte I certainly don't think she's worried about those kind of internal consistencies of things and some things being chronologically out of place. But I do think that her making so much ado about Marmion in the last chapter, and again here and quoting from it, I think she's making a kind of statement. She's using Marmion to talk about that kind of poetic literature that she admires. And I like the little thing I was thinking about. It's a book from the recent past, that it was published in the recent past, about a more distant past. And Jane Eyre is in itself a work about Jane's past, because she's writing this 10 years later. And that there's some Gothic involved in Marmion, although it's not a Gothic poem, but there is some Gothic. The idea that in Gothic is all about the curse from the past. But now something that Walter Scott has really contributed is this idea of historical fiction, whether it's in his narrative poems or his novels, is that that there's not, unlike the Gothic look at the past, the historical fiction is a more nostalgic view of the past. And it's also very didactic. I think
and that's where the Gothic comes from, because the Gothic is very, and you'll probably heard me talk about this quite a lot, but the Gothic is very much about the nostalgia, and that's where I draw the line between historical fiction and Gothic fiction. Obviously they're a Venn diagram, they often overlap, they often share traits, but not all Gothic is historic fiction and vice versa. The difference between the two genres, shall we say, where you could put something into one and maybe not the other, is that the Gothic mythologizes, and Scott mythologizes, and that's why Scott's work maybe is not always generically Gothic, but is so heavily laced with Gothic and inspires the Gothic, is because it's mythologizing a period of time, and that kind of, I refer to this quite a lot as that kind of like rose-tinted nostalgia, which is what you get before the French Revolution. It's what you get, this is why the term Anglo-Saxon exists. There is no such thing as the Anglo-Saxon. Never existed. It's not a coherent people. It's not a race. It's not an ethnography. Like it doesn't exist. But in the 18th century, to create a sense of patriotism, England self-mythologizes its history to create the idea of the Anglo-Saxon warrior. And we do the same thing with Arthur. Scott then does the same thing with Scottish history predominantly, but also with a lot of Northern British history. you know, with places like Castleton. What's the other castle we went to, Mary? There's a bunch of castles around Yorkshire. Is it? I feel like it also begins with a C. We went there and we took pictures of it specifically because of it. Conisbrough, that's
Conisbrough Castle.
Which is the Robin Hood one, isn't it? Suppose in the novel. Yeah, like he mythologizes this history.
Also in Ivanhoe, which is his really famous medieval English kind of romance. So yeah, Marmion's a really interesting text if you are interested in like kind of verse medieval romances. And it has that kind of Scottish English thing. I think Scott's quite experimental in his kind of verse and the rhyme scheme there. And plays a lot with that whole mythologizing national identity, and these kinds of also like the romance element of it and the love triangle kind of. So I think Marmion, Lord Marmion basically spends the entire verse trying to go after a woman who is in love with and engaged to somebody else. And it's that idea of, you know, that as well, and who is a hero and who is heroic, and it culminating with a battle. And again, when he gets to Ivanhoe, which was published in 1820, it's predominantly about English national history and the creation of the English Anglo-Saxon myth. So the idea that you have the kind of the Saxons and the Normans coming together and uniting under Richard the Lionheart through Ivanhoe, and the English princess Rowena, and then you had Rebecca. Rowena. Is it Rowena? Yes.
Rowena.
But you also have a kind of love triangle in that. And if anyone's not interested in reading verse, I'd say read Ivanhoe to get a kind of idea about Scott and that kind of English national history. Although obviously most of his work is about Scotland. So I think the Waverley novels are all about kind of that Scottish national identity. One thing to also note about Scott is that, like quite a lot of authors, he was perpetually bankrupt, which is one of the reasons why he was continually republishing his works and
he
putting out
became
new
bankrupt.
editions.
It was 5 years ago, or less than that, before his death. He had all his money was invested in the publisher printer who published his works, and he lost all of it. And then had to write as much as he could and republish his works as much as he could. And he cleared up all his bankrupt debt. He didn't get out of any of it. He paid it all off before he had died. He also had Abbotsford, which cost a fortune to create and then maintain. So he managed to keep it all until he died in he died 30 or 32, something like that. But I think it's 1832 he died.
Beginning. I know it's the beginning of the decade. But Marmion's also interesting in that way. Like, just thinking about what both of you were just saying, like, it's very much a translation of the chivalric romance. So, the chivalric romance comes over from France. It gets reappropriated as an English form to talk about English history. And then Scott reappropriates it again to talk about Scotland and Scottish history and Scottish nationalism. And I think to have a character like Jane, who doesn't have, home doesn't mean much for her, like she's without that identity, she's this kind of almost like a wanderer figure, that you have this kind of this work, especially because Marmion is verse, that it's a literary form that's gone through, like, by this point 6 kind of reappropriations. Like, it's patriotic, then it's Gothic, then it's English, now it's Scottish, and now Jane is reading it as a young woman of no clear family, no clear home, living in the north of England. Like that, I think as well, like there's something to be said there about sort of, how we think about texts in the creation of identity. It's a really wonderful metatextual moment from Bronte.
as you say that, that and that Scott being a kind of almost a new take on this kind of chivalric romance, he's bringing it into the 19th century and shaping it in different ways. Does Jane Eyre and do these kind of for lack of a better term, marriage novels that Austen was writing and other people are writing, and Bronte and Charlotte is certainly, kind of in this. Is this a kind of way of bringing that chivalric romance idea, kind of updating it, just as she does with, some of the Gothic elements?
This is where I potentially fall out with other scholars, because I would say yes. Like, this is one of my big things that, like, to me, those are texts that are designed to be didactic through the supernatural, through the foreign, through the Gothic, through the past. They exist to tell a story to a specific audience, to translate and to communicate specific things. The Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars destroy that. This, to me, it's kind of like what happens with postmodernism and the Second World War. You suddenly can't do the same sort of dreamy, nostalgic Gothic past that you could, because this terrible, huge, massive, monumental change has happened. And then you get all of these very realistic, very life-like novels. And I think, yeah, they do. To me, I see them very much as a recreation of the chivalric romance, of, the heroic tale in a way that is not immediately obvious, because all of those elements that make things like the Fairy Queen a chivalric romance are taken away, but you have the same sort of misunderstandings, abuses of power, romances that kind of transcend boundaries of class and space and time. And I think that this is very much that reimagining of literature that happens after huge global catastrophes. I don't think everybody necessarily agrees with me, but to me that is very much what I see, and I think you can prove that because writers like Austen, Shelley, and Bronte are so consciously engaging with that past. Austen writes Northanger Abbey, but she also has characters referring to text throughout all of her published novels. We have Shelley writing Perkin Warbeck and Valperga, and then we have Bronte, and we have characters like Jane, but we also get this in Anne's text, and we get this in novels like Villette. They're always kind of looking backwards and talking about the expectations that they have because of history and because of text. And when you think about the Bronte Juvenilia, I think you can it's there and you can see it. And I think if you look through that lens, you get a very interesting narrative strand. But maybe that's my crackpot conspiracy theory.
No, I'm good with that. I'm glad I asked that too, because I see that some as well, and I'm glad I asked somebody who could really put that into words.
That's my current like little pet passion theory, that now I've finished, because my work was very much ended kind of like just after the Napoleonic, and I keep being like, I need to prove my point about what happens afterwards. So watch this space. Academic publishing takes a long time, so probably 5 years before I say anything about it. But one day.
Well, I'm always happy to take a Scott digression. That really took it. We're literally like in the first paragraph of this chapter, so and I'm happy we did that. But then we get a little quote, from the beginning of Marmion: "Day set on Norham's castled steep, and Tweed's fair river broad and deep, and Cheviot's mountains lone." And it's Scott's, kind of, taking the reader to another time and play that long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, movement, which I really love. And Jane loves that too. I soon forgot storm in music, the music of the poetry of this. And then she hears a noise, the wind, and then no, it's St. John. Came in out of the frozen hurricane, the howling darkness, and stood before me, the cloak that covered his tall figure all white as a glacier. We talked a little bit last week about, Adam had brought up a question about St. John being that, or being prefigured in that frozen figure in one of, Jane's paintings, watercolor paintings. And that's always there with him, right? This icy figurative language with him.
Absolutely, he is. I mean, he's cold to a certain extent. He's immovable, which I think is also something to bear in mind in this chapter, and then in later chapters. He sets his mind on something, and he cannot be moved. He cannot be thawed. And yeah, like his exterior is that kind of statuesque, beautiful Grecian, and really aesthetic. But what's underneath is just as hard. And it's quite difficult to kind of break through that exterior. And you get that here, he's white as a glacier. And then a little bit further down, we have that handsome featured face of his look more like chiseled marble. And then again, it grieved me to discover the hollow trace of care or sorrow now so plainly graved. So that idea that his face is literally chiseled marble, stone, ice, whichever, to really emphasize his hardness and his coldness. And again, I think you have discussed this, but it really contrasts with both Jane, but also with Rochester. And Jane and Rochester had such an interesting kind of back and forth whenever they were together. But you never had that sense that he was hard and stone, and that she was shut out in the way that even here as kind of friends, there is that kind of that barrier, I guess, between them, that I think is interesting.
St. John goes out of his way, though, in the last chapter to explain to Jane how he's not like that. He has this restless sea inside him, and that's what he's always trying to hold in. So does that help make us more kind of sympathetic towards him? Because there's so much in the last chapter, especially about last couple chapters, about that Bronte's putting in there, kind of aligning Jane and St. John as, that they have a lot of similarities. They both kind of are hurt and trying to recover right now, but he obviously has choices that she doesn't. So that's also there.
There's a lot to be said at this point about the Burkean idea of the sublime. I think less so the Kantian idea, but certainly the Burkean idea of the sublime and the beautiful. Rochester is consciously coded as sublime. Because the sublime is always has a beauty, but is not always beautiful, and that's made very clear in the beautiful and the sublime. But St. John is beautiful. He looks as though he is carved from marble. He is handsome, and I think that there's something that Bronte is kind of poking at here about the way that we value beauty and the way that beauty. It's almost a commentary on beauty standards. Jane is plain, and she's kind of like unassuming, and we've had her compared to characters like Blanche Ingram, and I think that it's directly challenging the heroes of the sentimental novels and some of the Gothic romances of kind of like the last kind of 20-30 years before this is published. He's not devoid, he's not incapable, he's not immovable, but it's saying something about, we'd probably call it pretty privilege now. Like, it's quite a modern concept, but it's this kind of acknowledgement that he can't quite understand that deeper level. He lacks the consciousness of sublimity, and that's the difference between him and Jane, is that Jane, it's like that moment in Austen, Northanger Abbey, when Eleanor and Henry Tilney are looking at the scenery and they're admiring the sublimity, and Catherine is like, yes, I too have an emotional connection to this, and she doesn't really understand like how to get it, but she's not a bad person. She doesn't, she's not, it's a sweet jokey moment. But with St. John, because he's male and there's this patriarchal element to it directly sets them apart from Rochester, who is sublime, and from Jane, who has an appreciation of the sublime. And I think we are supposed to feel sympathetic for him in a similar way that we're supposed to feel sympathetic for characters like Valancourt in Radcliffe, where they're sort of like a victim of the system, that, you know, because he is beautiful and because he's in a patriarchal position of power and he's never really had to struggle. This, I think, you know, the fact that, spoiler alert, he wants to be a missionary, it's like he's seeking struggle to maybe try, and he's aware of this kind of emptiness. And I think that's why he does kind of have this impulse towards Jane, because she has that experience, she has that understanding, and he's not fully incapable of it, but he does lack it, and he's not entirely actually willing to give it up. Like, he recognizes the privilege that it gives him. And I think that's why you get this kind of, it makes Jane almost feel sad that he's so beautiful, if that makes sense.
Doesn't he though? I mean, he recognizes that, you know, awesome, sublime, but refuses to acknowledge it, or even when he knows it, he thinks like it's I don't know, kind of sinful to give into it. Perhaps.
I think it's that kind of thing of like control, like he can't connect to it, which is so interesting when you think about the sublime in a divine sense, and that he is a clergyman, and that he ultimately will go on mission, which, you know, I think Bronte is hinting again that missions, even at this point, are problematic and have, you know, distinct empirical connotations.
Is she? I wonder if she is really, like, she seems to buy into it.
Like, she's kind of, I think she's kind of like half and half. Yeah. I think her issue with it is that people like St. John go on them. I don't think her issue is with mission. I think her issue is with the missionaries, in the same way that her issue is not with religion, it's with certain religious figures. Like, I kind of see it similar as to what happens at Lowood. She doesn't have an issue with a religious backed school. She has issue with the way that it's being used to create this kind of like oppressive system.
Well, you guys will be on for the very last episode, and it really hits like at the very end, the very last chapter. We'll have this to talk about, definitely. Let me take a quick mid-break to remind people of things that we bring Sundays with Jane Eyre to you for free. So if you'd like to support the Rosenbach through donation, you could do so at our website. And since this novel was published in 1847, we're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show. We love being able to put on Sundays with Jane Eyre for you every week, and it takes a lot of time and work. So please consider a gift to help us reach our goal of $2,500 to produce the next series that we'll do and keep this show free and accessible to everyone. I want to thank people who donated in the last week. Kimberlyn D. from Hoover, Alabama, Kate P. from Doylestown, PA, and Charles S. from Shoalshire, Martinique. I was like, ooh, all right, there's a nice donation from someone in Martinique. You could also become a member of the Rosenbach. And I want to thank Alicia P. from Brooklyn, New York, Justin B. from Springfield, PA, and Rebecca A. from Philadelphia, who all joined in the last week. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, plus 10% off of any of our reading courses, 50% off of any Rosenbach paid programs. Lots of great programs and courses coming up. Our new spring programs and courses from April to June are now up online. Members can register now, and the general public can start registering this week on March 16th. Our final winter course, I want to mention to people, starts this week, and it's one that I'm actually really looking forward to. It is Jules Verne's Scientific Imagination, led by Anastasia Klimchinskaya. Many of you know her. She was one of our co-hosts on Sundays with Frankenstein. She also taught a Frankenstein course, virtual Frankenstein course for us about, the kind of scientific, influences of the 18th and 19th century that Mary Shelley put in the novel. So I'm very much looking forward to Jules Verne this week. I'm going to be in that. So if you take that course, I'll be in it too. That'll be a lot of fun. So From Earth to the Moon, we're talking about this Thursday. You can join on the Rosenbach website. We're also going to have a Bronte course in which we're going to cover the novels except Jane Eyre. And that course is going to start on April 24th. After this show ends, a couple weeks later, it'll be on a Sunday in the same time slot. It'll meet 4 times. It won't be weekly. It'll be a monthly course. And it's called The Brontes Revisited, Reappraised, and Reimagined. And we have the 3 new Bronte biographers, Claire Callahan, who wrote about Emily Bronte, Sophie Franklin, who wrote a bio of Charlotte, and Adele Hay, who wrote a bio of Anne Bronte. They're each going to teach one of the works. Claire will obviously do Wuthering Heights. Sophie will do Villette, and Adele Hay will do Tenant of Wildfeld Hall. And then there'll be one more session where the 3 of them just get on and talk about the Brontes. So it'll be a very exciting course. I really hope it'll fill up with everybody who watches this program to take it. If you're a member, you can register now on the Rosenbach's website and get 10% off if you're a member. And if you're not a member yet, well, I invite you to join. But if you do not, then you can start registering for that on Wednesday this week. We still have some Sundays with Jane Eyre merchandise, mugs, and T-shirts. And now through April 11, all of our Bronte stores and Airheads can use the code RML member to receive 20% off. To receive the 20% off member discount, regardless of whether or not you're a member. But if you are a member, then you can use the code RML member 30 and get another 10% off. I'll put this is in the chat. We'll post it on our site. So, or post it in the comments on the YouTube video too. Upcoming co-hosts for March. Only 4 episodes left. Wow. Kathleen Hudson will join us next week. Then Rowan Coleman will be back. And then Sophie Franklin will join us. And then we will wrap up with you guys on April 10th with the Ghoul Guides, Lauren and Mary. For Reader, I Married Him. Let's return to the book. Whoops. Whew, a lot to talk about today in the mid-break. I got it all in, and now we still have almost an entire chapter to talk about. St. John returns. He's acting odd, even for St. John. He's acting odd. Jane notices he doesn't look well. She comments. He just brushes it off. He's being awkward. He doesn't talk at first. So she sits and reads her book, and then he finally decides he's going to tell a story. And he says, where is it? Yeah, they have some small talk here, and then leave your book a moment and come a little nearer the fire, he said. And then he starts to tell this story. 20 years ago, a poor curate, never mind his name at this moment, fell in love with a rich man's daughter. Like he's telling this, fairy story. And I find this fascinating too, because this is exactly how Rochester approaches everything in his life. It's all a story. It's all this fantasy story that he's going to tell. Sid is not like that at all. But for Jane, he is going forward with this. They left the daughter. Then he mentions Mrs. Reed of Gateshead, and he can, and there's recognition that Jane knows what he's talking about now. He mentions the Lowood School. She leaves to be a governess, and then he finally mentions, for Mr. Rochester. And here's where Jane interrupts. Mr. Rivers, I interrupted. That this is he knows her whole life story, and he's letting her know that.
Before we go on, this is just also really interesting because this whole book that we are reading is the story of Jane Eyre, and St. John is essentially sitting down, just as Jane has sat down with her Marmion book, but he sat down, and we're now in a kind of storytelling. She's not just reading a book, but he's storytelling with her, and it's the same tale that we're reading. It's the story of Jane Eyre. He just he keeps that kind of that secret to the kind of, for a dramatic bit at the end. But it's not just, we can see through his kind of narration that Jane is an active listener, and she's reacting. So he says, I come now to names. Mrs. Reed of Gateshead, you start. Did you hear a noise? Which I think is really funny, because he must know that she knows what's happening, and it's a whole kind of, you know that I know, and I know that you know that I know, but we're just going to have this kind of little bit of drama as we storytell. And then again, you know, it seems her career there was very honourable from a pupil. She became a teacher like yourself. It strikes me there are parallel points in her history and yours, and it's just that kind of that playfulness, almost a bit arrogant, and you know, just come out and be straight with Jane. Yeah, he tells her this story, and then we get to the whole Rochester bit, and then she you know, verbally interrupts and breaks his narrative. But I just think it's a really interesting way of, you know, him telling her back the story of her life that we have also been reading.
It strikes me as being out of character for him too, and that, you know, that teasing kind of way is not something that he normally does. That's something that Rochester does like all the time with Jane, and here St. John's, you know, starting it, but Jane doesn't. When Rochester does the teasing thing, it's about her to get him to link with him. But of course, in here, because he's mentioned Rochester, Jane doesn't care about anything else he's saying. And as soon as he starts to, I was looking for clues to, like, kind of, you know, in the way, like, we get a different perspective, but we don't really get much. He says at one point, of Mr. Rochester's character, I know nothing but the one fact that he professed to offer honorable marriage to this young girl. And at the very altar, she discovered he had a wife yet alive, though a lunatic. And even after, he doesn't kind of go into any kind of perspective that we don't have, because he doesn't really know what happened. But again, as he mentions Mr. Rochester, Jane's reaction to the whole story isn't, you know, oh my gosh, I can't believe you know all this about me. Her reaction is, what of Mr. Rochester? How and where is he? What is he doing? Is he well? Like, that's the only thing that she has on her mind now. And clearly not what St. John thought she would like that. I don't think he thought that's what was going to be what she really reacted to. He thought, haha, I know who you are. And then she's all like, what about Rochester?
I think it also shows how different they are in terms of their wants and needs. And I think, you know, he has this piece of information about her, and not you know, not to spoil it, but it, you know, he has mentioned before that him and his sisters have this relative, and if not for this unknown other relative, they would inherit a lot of money. And I think there's that, perhaps that kind of under the surface, that not annoyance, but, you know, but for you, my sisters and I would be monetarily fine. And that's what he's focusing on. He's always focusing on the money. And Jane,
we'll get to that at the end. I don't want to tip that now, because that becomes a factor at the end of this, you know, meeting between the two of them. Jane's first reaction is, what my worst fears were then probably true. Not that I've been discovered, but about Rochester. He had in all probability left England and rushed in reckless desperation to some former haunt in the continent. She's just worried that he's leading a dissipated life again. And as soon as Rivers says, St. John says anything bad about it, he must have been a bad man. You don't know him. Don't pronounce an opinion upon him. She is, you know, you're not talking about Mr. Rochester in any kind of bad way, even though he kept his, you know, mad wife locked in a windowless room and refused to tell me and tried to marry me without telling me that. She's not having any of that. She is defending him to those who don't know him. This is when he shows her the slip of paper, a shabby slip of paper hastily torn off, and then she recognizes that, you know, in its texture and its stains of ultramarine, like she's looking at the artist, looks at it like, this is, you know, a piece of my art, right? Ultramarine and lake and vermilion, the ravished margin of the portrait. And then he holds it up, and it has her name. She has signed, what did he say? The work, doubtless, of some moment of abstraction. is what she realizes she has signed her name to this artwork. That her moment of abstraction, but also her moment of, asserting her own, independence, her own individuality as someone who can create art. And that is what has given her away here. He's, you own the name and renounce the alias. And she's like, yeah, but what about Rochester? Again, she's right back to that. Mr. Briggs might know more. And now we get the, why he was contacted. And well, he talks about, Briggs says that your uncle, Mr. Eyre of Madeira, is dead. And he has left you all his property, and you are now rich. Merely that and nothing more. I rich? Yes, you rich, quite an heiress. Silence succeeded. She doesn't, it's partly a shock, but also she tells us why. Why don't you read that "here was a new card turned up" paragraph here? And this is Jane's reaction to becoming rich. Not the reaction I would have, but hers.
Yeah, I can do it. Here was a new card turned up. It is a fine thing, reader, to be lifted in a moment from indigence to wealth. A very fine indigence.
Okay, I'm making sure.
That's a completely different word.
Yes.
A very fine thing, but not a matter one can comprehend or consequently enjoy all at once. And then there are other chances in life far more thrilling and rapture-giving. This is solid, an affair of the actual world, nothing ideal about it. All its associations are solid and sober, and its manifestations are the same. One does not jump and spring and shout hurrah at hearing one has got a fortune. One begins to consider responsibilities and to ponder business on a base of steady satisfaction, rise certain grave cares, and we contain ourselves and brood over our bliss with a solemn brow. Besides, the words legacy, bequest go side by side with the words death, funeral, which I think is a really interesting thing that she goes straight onto. Not only does she have fortune, and that brings with it responsibility, this only relative, this little flame of hope that she's cherished since she was told
she
about
heard
it
about
by
it.
her aunt.
She wasn't excited about being the heir to him. She was excited, like, I have a living relative.
Yeah, like she's been holding on to that idea of having an uncle as like and I think this kind of links to what I said earlier about her not having a home as an identity or a family as an identity. The fact that she's not the only heir, that she's not the only one of her family in the world, really sort of like comforts her, which becomes such a massive Gothic trope in contemporary Gothic. We get a lot of, last of the species, or last of the kind, or last of a long line in the Gothic. And I think you see that here in Jane, that she's kind of like, oh, I am the last now. Like this family, this idea of family that I thought I had has been extinguished. And really interestingly, because so many novels before this point are like, when my aunt dies, I'll be rich. I can't, like the Willoughby, I can't wait until she kicks the bucket because then I get to do whatever I want because I'll be rich. Jane's first thought of having a fortune is, oh my God, responsibility. Her second thought is, well, I only have this because someone is dead and I never got to meet them. Then she comes to, and independence would be glorious. Yes, I felt that thought swelled through my heart. Like that's the third thing she settles on, not the first thing that she settles on.
Independence would be glorious. Something that, she, hasn't had ever. This sense of being, well, I mean, she always asserts it and she demands it, but reality is she can never be independent because she can't survive in this world, without some kind of dependency on people. And And now she has it, and he tells her it's £20,000. Now, we can calculate that worth in today's dollars, but that varies so widely in whatever kind of system you're using to calculate it. So, but for me, just suffices to say, she's rich. She can live
It's a lot.
very comfortably for the rest of her life, just off the interest alone. She doesn't have to do anything now. This is quite a lot of money.
Which I don't know if everybody's aware of that. That's kind of how it works at this point in time, is that when you see like, oh, he has 10,000 a year, the way that it works is it's the interest from your money in the bank, it's from any property that you have, from any rent. So, but having a fortune, you are paid obviously the interest, and what most people were living on was actually the interest from the fortune, not the fortune itself. And that's why it's familial wealth. And that was the distinguishment between the middle classes and the upper classes, in terms of that kind of like real money and present money, if that makes sense. So yeah,
the upper class didn't have to do anything. If you're landed, you didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Unless you spent it all, and then you were in debt, and then you had to marry another.
Unless you did a tenant of Welfare Hall and you ruined yourself. But for her having a lump sum, and often women were given a dowry, so their money was a lump sum. That money that they would have would be the annual interest paid from their estate. So 20,000 is a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah. And then she's like, and I love her reaction here. Whoa, maybe you're wrong. Maybe it was 2,000, And then he's like, nope, it's written in letters, not figures, 20,000. And I again felt rather like an individual of but average gastronomical powers sitting down to feast alone at a table spread with provisions for 100. That's her metaphor for this. That, oh my gosh, this is a feast, and Jane is very much a enough is as good as a feast kind of person. So she doesn't need all of these riches. Obviously, she's so content to live in this little. She has her own. It was 2 chapters ago. I have my own little cottage with her, just barely furnished, but it is only that's all that she needs. When Rochester tries to give her things before, I don't want any of that. No fancy dresses. Just this is how I want to be. So it's actually a little anxiety, for her to have this much money in the kind of person that she is. And then Mr. Odd Awkward St. John's like, all right, I'm leaving.
Okay, bye.
And she stops him because she realizes, wait a minute, there's still something fishy about this. Why would Briggs contact you about this to begin with? And she has this, I love this little battle she has with him to get him to continue the story. It's like, another time, no, tonight. And, and he says, I apprised you that I was a hard man, difficult to persuade. Like, come on. And I love her response. And I am a hard woman, impossible to be put off. And he says, and then I am cold, no fervor infects me. And she says, whereas I am hot and fire dissolves ice. She's going to have an answer for anything you say, St. John. So you may as well, just tell her what's what. And he does. And he says, I was christened St. John Eyre Rivers. And then he gets to tell another story. This is like, he's not I guess he should be, as the clergyman. This is what he does for a living. But I'm just surprised at him as a storyteller. And he does. My mother's name was Eyre. She had 2 brothers, one a clergyman who married Miss Jane Reed of Gateshead, the other John Eyre Esquire, merchant, late of Funchal, Madeira. And this is a story that we've already gotten a little bit of without the names several chapters ago, about how the uncles quarreled, and the brothers quarreled and didn't speak again. And so Jane now realizes, she says, your mother was my father's sister. Yes. My aunt, consequently, he bowed. My Uncle John was your Uncle John. Like, she has to get it all in there. You, Diana, Mary, are his sister's children, and I am his brother's child. You three then are my cousins. Half our blood on each side flows from the same source. We are cousins, yes. And then, Mary, why don't you read this paragraph? This is her glorious kind of, this is what she wants, not the riches, but this.
I also just love, just before we get to this, before she repeats his explanation, she says, I knew by instinct how this matter stood before St. John had said another word.
Yeah.
But I cannot expect the reader to have the same intuitive perception, so I must repeat his explanation. So this idea that she says every kind of thing about how they're related in so precise detail because she wants the reader to know. But as soon as he said his name, she's already made all of these connections in her head, and she understands that, which I think is really important. But also I just find it funny that she's, calling the reader out, so you won't know this. Let me just say it out for you. Do you want me, I surveyed him?
Yeah.
I surveyed him. It seemed I had found a brother, one I could be proud of, one I could love, and two sisters whose qualities were such that when I knew them but as mere strangers, they had inspired me with genuine affection and admiration. The two girls, on whom, kneeling down on the wet ground and looking through the low, latticed window of Moorhouse kitchen, I had gazed with so bitter a mixture of interest and despair, were my near kinswomen, and the young and stately gentleman who had found me almost dying at his threshold was my blood relation. Glorious discovery to a lonely wretch. This was wealth indeed, wealth for the heart, a mine of pure, genial affections. This was a blessing, bright, vivid, and exhilarating, not like the ponderous gift of gold, rich and welcome enough in its own way, but sobering from its weight. I now clapped my hands in sudden joy. My pulse bounded, my veins thrilled. Oh, I am glad, I exclaimed. So yeah, you have this really interesting contrast with the discovery that she's wealthy and also how wealthy she is, and then the discovery that she has relations that are still alive, and also they're these people that she's essentially fallen in love with in that kind of fraternal way already, and that she admires, and that to her is worth so much more than the money. And there's that acknowledgement, the money is good, and especially because she has experienced the having no money and being poor and essentially a beggar, even if it was just for a few days. She understands and can appreciate the wealth and the gift of knowing that you can be independent and that you have a secure home, you don't have to worry about food and all of those kinds of things. But this is much more important, the idea that she has people that she can belong to, and that she has ties that cannot be severed. And I think that's so important because Jane has been orphaned from such a young age. She's experienced such loneliness, abandonment, all of these kinds of things. Just at the moment when she was going to tie herself to somebody, that was ripped from her. But here is something, and because it is familial, it's something that can never be taken from her, and potentially may spawn new kind of familial ties. If St. John marries someone, potentially, or perhaps Diana and Mary, and it's that idea of she'll never be lonely again. And as someone who has been so lonely, that's such an important thing for her.
Yeah, like when she says, I had loved barrenly, I could now benefit, it's like a double meaning that she's loved barrenly because she's poor and she was not able to repay them in any way apart from her company for their kindness and their care, but also because they were sisters, they were family, and she wasn't part of that, and she's not been able to be a part of that, and now she can be part of that. So it's their barrenness and her barrenness, this familial connection, and the fortune, as she goes on to say next, when she says, I could free them, they were scattered, I could reunite them, that suddenly she can bring them together. It's I find that line, like, I had loved barrenly, quite heartbreaking, because that is Jane up until this point in such a kind of nutshell, you know, that she feels like she doesn't have anything that she can give back because of the kind of unjust situation and the unprivileged situation that she's in, and all of a sudden she has the ability to build the family that she's always kind of dreamed of having.
Yeah, this is her life's dream more than anything, is to have these, you know, close connections. And she even points out to us how she wants to do is, God, what was that?
Say, the first thing that she wants to do is to have him write to Diana and Mary. That's like the first thing that she's thinking, is like, bring them home. Like that's you know, she's not like, oh, let's go to talk to the lawyer, let's talk to the bank, let's find out about the property. She's like, we're gonna get them home now, we're gonna be a family, like it's gonna be great. That's her first thought.
She also has the moment too where she calls our attention again to how she first discovered them. She's, you know, wandering the moors, and then that's the house that she sees the light, and she goes up to and sees them, and that kind of, you know, coincidence is not something that, you know, modern readers find, you know, very believable or useful in books, but it's what people expect to read in a 19th century novel, and it also ties in so well with everything that she's been talking about through this whole book. I mean, this whole connections with people and how we're all brought together. You know, Dickens does the same thing, but Bronte really has it tied into the natural world too, which I really like. And that how they bring, of course, it's not, oh, can you believe that she would just come across the house with her cousins? No, it's, of course she would come across the house with her cousins, because that's the world, that's the kind of universe that she is in.
It's also how Providence works.
Yeah. She wants to give them the money right away. You have sisters, and I don't care for a cousin, but I had nobody. And she wants to give them the money. The 20,000 could be shared equally, 5,000 each. It's like, this is easy. I don't even have to do any math here. It's, you know, I do a little math, but it's very little. There's just 4 of us. It's $5,000, mutual happiness secured. And then St. John, though, he's got to mansplain what's going on here. Like, no. You're overreacting here. You know, when you have money, you have, you know, and he goes into this whole, you know, tries to, you know, you can't do that. I've been too abrupt in communicating the news. This has excited you beyond your strength. Please have a seat. Get the smelling salts out. You can't handle having all this money. And she's great. She's just changed. She's like, no, you know, like I recognize exactly what's going on here, and it's about justice for her. I love that. That this is a just thing to do. So there's nothing to be even debated. It's like, if you acknowledge that it's just, then it is what you're supposed to do. He tries to bring in custom about it, and he says, you know, that but even before that, she says, I love this. Again, we get the cold St. John here, because he says, well, you're gonna, you know, you may marry, and then, you know, you can't give away all this money. Maybe you're gonna marry again. And she says, I don't want to marry and never shall. And she takes a very realistic view, but also a very emotional view for still how she feels for Rochester. She says, no one would take me for love, and I will not be regarded in the light of a mere money speculation. And I do not want a stranger, unsympathizing alien, different from me. I want my kindred, those with whom I have full fellow feeling. If she can't have Rochester, who she really believes that she is, you know, tied to the soul with, then she wants, you know, full fellow feel. She wants a family. She wants kindred. And then it's his response, this cold response that he has, like, this is how he describes his family relationships. He says, I know I have always loved my own sisters, and I know on what my affection for them is grounded: respect for their worth and admiration of their talents. The 2 things I would never say about why I love my family. But you two have principle and mind. Your tastes and habits resemble Diana's and Mary's. Your presence is always agreeable to me. In your conversation, I have already for some time found a salutary solace. I feel I can easily and naturally make room in my heart for you as my third and youngest sister. I mean, yeah, that's not effusive.
I mean, given what comes next, in the next few chapters, it's not really like setting things up for his proposal plan, is he? You're agreeable to me. But I guess that's just exactly how, you're tolerable. But I guess that is kind of how his proposal goes, looking at it through that kind of practical lens and, thinking with his head and not with his heart. And it makes me wonder what would St. John have done if they had never found Jane Eyre and the three of them, or just he had been, bequeathed the £20,000. Would he have kept it for the three of them, or if he had sole claim to the legacy, what would he have done? Obviously he wouldn't have kept it all for himself, but would he have shared it with his sisters, or would he have kind of shared it with the church, or maybe with
Diana and Mary? We need to give away all this money, and you need to toil as governesses, and I'll go be a missionary.
The thing
I don't think he would have kept it.
No, and the thing that really, really, really bothers me, and this I think pinpoints the reason why I dislike him so much as a character, is that he cannot understand and doesn't even consider why this would be important to her, and is ready to just deny her the information, and is like, Diana and Mary can tell you. Like, I'd rather they tell you. Orphan, he knows the situation, like he's fully aware of it, and he's ready to not let her have it. He's ready to deny her something, and then when she clearly is so overwhelmed and so happy, he's still like like
it's a lack of empathy. It's a lack of empathy. He can't empathize with Jane because he can't really imagine what it's like to grow up without any family, or to go through the hardships that she's been through. Mm-hmm. He can't imagine it, and he can't empathize or sympathize with it. And I think that's why it's so alien to him. And it's also probably why he would be a terrible missionary. But I always find St. John interesting because there are two ways to look at it, and I think sometimes we do get blinded by our kind of modern reading of him, which I think is very valid. And I think that in reevaluating and reconsidering the novel, St. John is just a terrible person. But in the period he wouldn't have been terrible in the way that we see him. So I think we do have to kind of consider that as well, in that maybe he wouldn't have been seen as a terrible missionary in the contemporary period.
He is a terrible patriarch because he neglects. He's being presented with a new sister, but also a financial savior for his actual sisters. He, as a gentleman, it is his responsibility, his duty, his role, and his right to care for them and do his utmost by them. And even if she was a third cousin, he has a responsibility to her to care for her and look after her. He is willing to not tell her the truth. He's also not jumping at the opportunity to build this family unit so that his sisters can have, not for himself, but his sisters, his poor sisters, that they could at least have some financial benefit, that even if she doesn't want to give them 5,000, he's not like, okay, well, maybe don't give them £5,000, give them £1,000. He's just like, no, I think you're being a bit ridiculous. Like, he doesn't actually behave at all in a gentleman-like manner in this moment. And that's the thing, like, compare him to someone like Sir Charles Grandison. As much as I dislike Richardson, we have this very, very clear framework of what gentlemanly behavior is expected to be and what's expected of a patriarchal figure, and he just does such a terrible job. Like, he is not good at it. And I think that's the thing. Like, he might not have been considered a bad missionary at the time, but I would strongly think if you're reading this with that understanding of sensibility, sentimentality, politeness, gentlemanliness, you would, what the hell is wrong with you? Like,
Yeah, and his
do
first
your job
reaction,
properly.
he says, "I do see a certain justice, but it is contrary to all custom that I'm gonna uphold the customs of how we're all supposed to behave and what we're supposed to do, which is obviously, you keep all the money and don't give it to anybody else. But that also leads me to think that as a patriarch, as the man in charge, that's exactly how he feels. He needs to always behave. It's all about custom. It's not really about justice. It's not
Which
really
is the
about
opposite. Yeah, and it's like the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Most of the kind of like inspirational didactic novels of the period and of kind of the late 18th century often will have a ward, a poor relation, a distant cousin, and the idea is supposed to be, this is what Mansfield Park is doing. You're not supposed to take Fanny in because she's poor and then treat her like she's poor. You're supposed to take her in and treat her as a member of the family. That's the true nature of charity, husbandry, of the Georgian concept of the gentleman that becomes the Victorian concept of the gentleman. And I think that's why I see him kind of on a par with almost like Brocklehurst, that they fulfill certain aspects of their identity, but not the ones that really matter, and the ones that, the ideologies that go with it. And that to me is why he's just such a poor excuse of a man.
And who takes over here in this situation? Jane, the poor orphan governess, takes over and fulfills that role at the very end of this chapter too. The last few lines, like the judges chosen were Mr. Oliver and an able lawyer. Both coincided in my opinion. I carried my point. The instruments of transfer were drawn out. St. John, Diana, and Mary and I each became possessed of a competency. She fulfills the role of what, in a patriarchal society, the men are supposed to be doing and taking care of the family. That's what Jane winds up doing. So,
yeah. And, what does she say? She's like, brother, yes, at the distance of 1,000 leagues. Sisters, yes, slaving amongst strangers. I, wealthy, gorged with gold, I never earned and do not merit. That point there, and, we get this a lot in Anne Bronte, that we're still at a point where women aren't given careers that dignify them. So it's not like, oh, aren't they fantastic? They're out there working women. They're at the mercy of strangers. This doesn't dignify them. It's wrong to have the ability to take them out of that situation and not do it, because it harms their reputation. It harms their dignity. We see in texts like Agnes Grey the terrible things and in Villette and in other Bronte texts, we see the terrible things that happen to women in these households and these situations. We almost see it for Jane. She almost gets tricked into a fraudulent marriage, and he knows that. He knows what's happened to Jane while she's been a governess, and he's still like, yes, but is it proper? Is this the proper way to do things? I might feel a bit guilty. And I think there's a gender disparity there as well. If she had been a man, would he have behaved in the same way? If she was John Eyre, his male cousin he just discovered, would he behave in the same way? I suspect maybe not, but yeah, there's a real kind of like, it's the kind of embodying an identity without really having any depth to it. And that's why he makes me angry. And in case you all couldn't tell right now, he makes me angry.
I really wanted to end it on this note, but somebody has a question real here in the Q&A about the money itself. St. John tells her that your fortune is vested in the English funds. Bridge has the will and the necessary documents. Can you comment on that? Jane's money is vested in the English funds. Is that have any particular meaning? Is that about how it's now in English or British funds, that it's not tied to like plantation or
it's essentially comes down to like a purely kind of legal. So if it's in the English funds, that means that it's already kind of been transferred. She doesn't have to go to Madeira to claim it.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas so you get this quite often, kind of like if a property, you have to go claim the inheritance, and you get this sometimes kind of with like post kind of revolutionary emigre families. So one of Jane Austen's cousins actually was married to a French comte, and he went back to France to try and claim the inheritance, and I think he was guillotined.
He was guillotined. Yeah, he didn't make it back out.
Yeah. They chopped his head off. So it's that thing of, and Jane Austen's brother considers, do we try and go to France to claim this money, because they are the inheritors of the estate, but they can't get it because they would have to go to France, prove their identity, and get it from France. Essentially, Jane's not got to, the point here is this money is on her doorstep. She's not got to either send an agent or herself go to Madeira, get the funds. Obviously it's a bit different because it would still be in pounds because this is still the British Empire, but it means it's actually being held by the lawyer. And she can just have it as soon as possible. So it's just about accessibility, really. And it kind of suggests that her uncle was it gives us a bit more about her uncle, that despite this falling out between the family, he already had thought about the fact that Jane's in England, and that she wouldn't have it would be really awful if he left it to her.
Yeah.
And you're expecting this penniless orphan girl to somehow get to Madeira or send an agent to Madeira to claim her fortune. So it also just tells us a little bit about the quality of her uncle. But apart from that, it's just purely a legal thing, and it would be it's that kind of detail that a reader at the time would be like, how'd she get the money so quick, if you didn't say it.
All righty. Well, everybody's rich, and Jane is going to, and Jane has her way. She winds up being the one who makes everybody rich, and that's where this chapter ends. Bronte Stores and Airheads, thank you all for tuning in. This is a record time for the two of you and me, but it was a short chapter. We even had a long Scott digression in the beginning.
I was going to say, we didn't even get past the first paragraph before we went to the mid-break.
And then it was just then it was just, it was easy to get through. We'll post this recording on our website, and if that's how you're watching, thanks for watching that way. We have a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group where you continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook, join in that conversation, and also go to the Rosenbach's YouTube account where we're live streaming this as well. Like the Jane Eyre video, subscribe to the channel, leave comments there. Thank you to Brianna, who, as usual, was our chat Mrs. Fairfax today. Thank you for managing the links in the chat, Brianna. Next week on episode 25, only 4 more to go, everybody. We have Dr. Kathleen Hudson joining us for her final time. We'll be talking about volume 3, chapter 8, or chapter 34. And we get St. John's beautifully romantic proposal to Jane. It's so dreamy, isn't it? So he's like Mr. Collins's awkward brother gets to propose to somebody. That will be next week. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have. And the Rosenbach is also open to visit. We have lots of in-person programs coming up in April and May. See our website for how we're making it safe for you to come and see our exhibitions in Historic House in person, and also come visit us in person and come to programs and attend courses. Please support the Rosenbach, which you can do by donation. We're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show, but any donation is welcome. And if you're not already a member, I invite you to join. Lauren and Mary, thank you so much for this one. We have one more to do with you. I can't wait for it. I can wait because I want to get through the rest of these chapters and do that stuff with Kathleen and Rowan and Sophie, and then finish up with you. So Lauren, congratulations on your actual in-person graduation and getting to wear the robe.
Thank you.
That's really great. And Mary, we'll have some point soon. We'll have get to do all that with, and congratulate you too. So, all right, guys, thank you. Playing us out, everyone, over the credits. We pleaded Gazelle's Secrets. Farewell, readers. May you live entirely for and with what you love best on earth. Bye-bye, everyone. And there we go. Alrighty. Bye-bye.